kitchen today, and as I film this, it's a cold and rainy day in the desert, so it's perfect weather for baking. So I thought I would show you how to make cinnamon star bread. And I started baking this about 5 years ago. It's a recipe from King Arthur flour. I guess they're called King Arthur baking now. And it's really delicious and beautiful. I'll put a picture up here now for you. And I just love this bread. It's not too sweet, but it does taste somewhat like a cinnamon roll. So let's get started. I'll show you the ingredients and I'll show you how to make the recipe. The ingredients you'll need for the dough: all-purpose flour, dried potato flakes, milk, warm water, unsalted butter, vanilla, sugar, salt, and yeast. For the filling, a beaten egg, granulated sugar, and cinnamon. Now, if you look at the original recipe on the King Arthur website, you'll see that I've made 2 substitutions. One is the yeast. I'm using regular yeast instead of instant yeast. And the other is the milk. I'm using regular milk instead of dry milk. And so I've tweaked the recipe a little bit. It'll turn out really good either way you bake it. For the filling, you'll just make some cinnamon sugar, and it's 1/2 cup of sugar. And 1 tablespoon of cinnamon. That's about a heaping tablespoon there. And mix that together. And I'll set that aside. And we'll also beat 1 egg into a small bowl. Since I'm using regular yeast, I'll go ahead and proof it. And it calls for 2.5 teaspoons of yeast. Now, if you were using instant yeast, you would just use 2 teaspoons. I had to increase it a little bit because I'm using regular yeast. And the recipe calls for 2 tablespoons of sugar. So I'll use a little bit of that sugar in my yeast. My water needs to be at about between 105 and 110. It's just below 110, so I think that should be fine. I'll go ahead and dump, it's 1/2 cup of water, and I'll stir that together, and I'll let that sit and see if it gets foamy. Okay, it's been about 10 minutes, and there's bubbles, and it's turned into a nice foam. So we know that that yeast is good yeast. And I'll set that aside just for a minute, and we'll go ahead and prepare the dough. We'll start with 2 cups of all-purpose flour. A 1/2 cup of dried potato flakes, 1 teaspoon of salt. The remainder of the sugar, we started out with 2 tablespoons and I used a little bit for the yeast. And I'll just mix those together. I'll add a 1/4 cup of milk. And I'll add my proofed yeast. 1 teaspoon of vanilla, and 4 tablespoons of unsalted butter. Okay, now I'll mix. You can do this by hand or with your mixer. I'll just do it by hand. Now my dough seems to be a little bit dry, so I'll start with 1 tablespoon of warm water. And you just have to kind of use your judgment here. Just add enough water until you're able to form it into a ball. And I think I'll add 1 more. And I think that should do it. And it's forming into a really nice ball. I'll just put some flour on my board. You can do this right on your countertop if you like. And my dough is turned into a nice ball. And I'll just knead it a few times, and you're just looking for it to get nice and smooth. Okay, now I'll put it right back into my bowl. You can grease your bowl if you like. I'll just put some flour down there in the bottom. And you'll cover and let it rise till it's about double in size. That'll usually take about an hour. It's been rising for about an hour, and it does look like it doubled in size. Now we need to divide this dough into 4 separate pieces. I'll just put it onto my floured board, and only a little bit stuck, that's good. First, what I'll do is I'll just divide it in half. I'll just eyeball it, and then I'll use my scale, and I'll just see which each one weighs. So I'll just repeat that again. I'll cut each one in half, and I'll form these into balls. And I'll cover these loosely and let them rest for about 15 minutes. And it's been 15 minutes, and if you can tell, they did go ahead and rise again. So now I'm going to roll each one out individually. So let me just move these out of the way. And you want to roll each one of these out into a 10-inch circle the best that you can. And this cutting board is actually about 10 inches wide. So it's about 10 inches across already. And I have this pastry knife, and it actually has measurements on it. I don't know if the camera can pick that up, but it's 6 inches across. So you can kind of see 6 and 4. So that's right about 10 inches round. I have a baking sheet lined with parchment paper, and I'll take the first piece of dough and place it on my parchment paper. And I'll just move this temporarily so the camera can see it. And just brush some of that egg on there. Now take your cinnamon sugar, and you're doing this in thirds, so try to use about 1/3 of your cinnamon sugar, and you just sprinkle it. And they recommend in the recipe to stay about 1/4 of an inch away from the edge. And that looks to be about right. And I'll set that aside and roll out my next ball of dough. Put some flour on there. And it's the same thing, 10-inch circular. And I'll just give it a quick measure. And that looks just about right. Now, all you're doing is layering this right on top. And repeat what you did before. brush some of the egg on. And again, 1/3 of your cinnamon sugar. And I'll place my final dough right on top. And this time I won't put any topping on it. Okay, now that it's all layered, take a biscuit cutter, or you could use a measuring cup, just something that's about 2 to 3 inches in diameter, and just put it right in the center. Now use your pastry cutter or a knife, and you're going to cut it into 16 pieces. So I'll just start in fourths. And you're using your biscuit cutter there as a guide. And then cut each section in half. And then cut each section in half again. Now to make it look like the star shapes, all you do is take 2 of your pieces at the same time, 1 in each hand, all 4 layers, and you turn them up and then turn them all the way again up. And then you simply pinch these edges together like so. And then you go to the next 2, pick them up once and twice, and pinch together. Do any adjusting and keeping them together that you need to. And I'll come back later and pinch these edges and make them look a little bit better. Okay, now is the time to make them look like you want them to look. So you just kind of pinch them together. Okay, it's been rising. Looks really nice. I have my oven preheated to 400 degrees, and I'll just add a little bit of my egg on top. Give it a little shine. Okay, fresh from the oven. You can garnish it with a little bit of powdered sugar. And you can see all the cinnamon. This cinnamon bread is really delicious. It's caramelized on the top, nice and chewy on the inside. It's a wonderful bread to bake on a cold, rainy day. I hope you give this recipe a try. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.